If you didn't feel like going for the fancy aspect warriors or the indomitable wraith units, but instead prefer the citizen soldiers of the Aeldari, then the Guardian Battlehost is a detachment that I think really could grab your attention. It may not be the most exciting one in terms of the model range you will be using in it, but if that is your vibe and you love the regular Guardians with their supporting war walkers and weapons platforms that make up the bulk of your army, then this detachment will let you play into that style really quite well. The detachment rule for the Guardian Battlehost is called Defend at All Costs, which is very fitting for the Craftworlds civilian defenders, and it allows your Dire Avengers, Guardians, support weapons, and Warwalker units to add +1 to their hit rolls if their target is within range of an objective marker or your unit is within range of an objective marker. So this will give you a really substantial boost in your output when you are trying to push enemies off an objective that you want, or if you are just sat back defending your own. So it will definitely help you to kill more of the enemy, and then also it will really help you play the scoring game a lot more effectively. It's nothing super complicated or over the top or fancy, but it can be very, very strong, pushing a lot of your units to 3s or even 2s to hit. Now, of course, only impacting those specific units is a bit of a drawback. None of your bigger tanks or your aspect units and that kind of thing will benefit, but you do still get quite a lot of improvement, especially if you do go Guardian heavy in this army. You get a lot of benefit to your anti-infantry firepower with all your shuriken catapults, and then actually you can get some really scary anti-tank firepower from those units from things like your D-cannon support platforms, not to mention the brilliant little Warwalkers, which are very good in this codex. They can bring 2 Bright Lances each and come in units of 1 or 2, so getting them to hit on 2s can add some significant anti-tank firepower to your army. The detachment really does let you boost firepower into almost any target, so I would say that it definitely has a lot more of an army-wide impact than you may initially think based on just the units that it can affect. And if you really do double down into that Guardian style with their supporting units, it does add quite a lot of firepower. It can even help in melee as well, of course, because your Storm Guardians will get +1 to hit in combat if they are fighting over an objective. So that can also just help to kill some enemy units that are holding an objective from you a little bit easier. They're still strength 3 with no AP, so it's still not going to do some amazing amounts of damage, don't get me wrong, but if your Storm Guardians are fighting off some enemy guardsmen or termagants or even orcs, that can help you kill them off a bit more effectively. So I do think it's a good detachment rule. I think it's got a lot of play. You do kind of have to lean into it a bit, but as I said, you can get some good units into this detachment that will benefit from it. And getting +1 to hit, especially on objectives, is going to have an impact most of the game because most of the game is played on or around objectives. In terms of your enhancements, these are all Asciani models, so it's pretty easy to fit these on anything you want from an Autarch to a Farseer that you've got in your army, and they do have a few solid choices in the list, a couple of duds, but you do have some good options. For 25 points, you get Craftworlds Champion. This gives the bearer an OC value of 5, which compared to the base value of 1 on things like Autarchs and Farseers is actually a huge increase. It does make them substantially better at holding an objective with the squad that they've joined. So it is a good buff, don't get me wrong. I just don't think it's worth 25 points for a purely OC related improvement. So I don't think this is one that is a must take by any stretch, but if you do worry about having objectives stolen from you, this could be one to bring just in case. The Ethereal Pathway is also quite pricey. This is 30 points, but this one does bring a fairly decent rule of granting 2 Guardian units in your army the infiltrate ability, so being able to move them up the board to get them nearer to an objective or get them into some better cover or terrain. That can be very worthwhile if you want 2 units that you need to keep a bit safer or possibly get their support platforms in range of an enemy or nearer to the midfield. It is essentially 15 points per unit for doing this, so I don't think it's awful. I just would personally prefer it if it was maybe 25 points, or you could maybe impact 3 Guardian units just to make it feel a bit more value for the points, because 30 points is a lot, but still it is a great enhancement to bring. It allows you to improve your objective play by getting some stuff up and nearer to objectives quicker. It does allow you to get some extra utility and use out of your Guardian unit, because they can potentially get in range a bit more easily and just be in a position where the enemy wasn't expecting them a bit earlier in the game. Protector of the Paths is a cheaper 20 points. This one is actually quite good. It grants a Dire Avenger or a Guardian unit that the bearer is leading the ability to Overwatch for 0 command points, and they also hit on 5s instead of 6s, or 4s if they are within range of an objective that you control. Now, of course, free Overwatch is definitely a useful trick in 10th edition. Being able to do it even on a unit that has just moved rather than relying on an enemy unit to charge can seriously limit where your opponent is going to want to place their units. But being able to do it on a 5+ or even a 4+ will make it really quite reliable, and on things like your support platforms, which can join a Guardian's unit in the declare battle formation step, that can make them really quite terrifying midfield pieces that the enemy absolutely needs to watch out for, potentially having D3, strength 16, -4 AP, D6 plus 2 damage shots with devastating wounds, firing into an enemy unit that is trying to get into the midfield can definitely make your opponent think hard about whether it's worth making that move. Especially, of course, because this goes off in the enemy's own movement phase, so they can really have their battle plan disrupted by you just putting that threat there. The fact that this enhancement can be used to screen out or block enemy movement in their own turn does make it, just from the threat of it, worth that 20 points, I think. It is just such a good ability that, as I said, will 100% alter your enemy's battle plans, and any damage that you do actually do will just be a really nice cherry on top. But you will, if nothing else, make them have to really think about what they are putting where, just from the threat of getting that Overwatch firing into them and hitting on 4s. The final enhancement is the Breath of Eval. This is a cheap 10 points, and it simply lets a Storm Guardians unit that the bearer has joined re-roll the number of attacks from flamer weapons they have, and also re-roll the damage roll for any fusion weapons they have. Now, Storm Guardians can take 2 fusion guns and 2 flamers in their unit of 10, so being able to re-roll the d6 rolls for the shots and the damage essentially gives you 4 free re-rolls when you are within 12 inches. Which actually isn't an awful little buff. It does make your unit much more reliable for getting a good number of hits into an enemy infantry unit, or really boosting your damage potential with the fusion guns into enemy tanks and monsters. So it is a really reliable little enhancement. I think at 10 points, I do think this is worth it if you have a unit of Storm Guardians and a character that you want to join with them, just to bring them that extra little output and maybe surprise an enemy with the amount of damage they can do, which a lot of people I think don't really consider from Storm Guardians, especially because most people think they're melee only, but having 2 flamers and 2 fusion guns does mean that when they are within 12 inches, they can actually start to threaten bigger units of Orc Boys or Termagants, and even threaten tanks with those 2 fusions, especially with the rerolls on their damage. As you might expect from the detachment, your stratagems are all focused around your Guardian units and your Dire Avengers and Warwalkers, and Warding Salvos is up first. This one is in the shooting or fight phase and grants a Dire Avenger or a Guardian unit the ability to re-roll wounds if their target is within range of an objective marker, making you essentially +1 to hit and re-rolling wounds, which is really quite good, especially on things like your Dire Avengers. It's going to let them rip enemy infantry units to absolute shreds with their output, and I believe as well this will also affect Assaman, so you can sort of do the same combo as you can in the Aspect detachment with his Dev Wound shooting profile, getting rerolls to wound on those, so he can add even more scary anti-infantry output if you wanted to bring him in this detachment too. Time to Strike is done in your movement phase. This affects a Storm Guardian unit. They can add 6 inches to their movement when they advance instead of rolling, so just netting them a flat 13-inch move, and they can also shoot and charge after advancing. So alongside your battle focus rules, it's very easy to get a Storm Guardian unit really far up the table into the midfield, potentially getting them a turn 1 charge if you wanted to try it. It's not guaranteed on this unit, especially when you compare it to the speed of things like jet bikes and that sort of thing, but it is still possible with that 13-inch move, including the advance, so it definitely will give them a chance to do a turn 1 charge, but it will absolutely help them to do a countercharge into an enemy that's in the midfield after they've moved up to try and grab an objective. So for one command point, it's a very handy tool to have in your pocket. In the enemy shooting or fight phase, you can go for the defensive shield node stratagem. This one is put on one of your Dire Avenger or Guardian units that's within range of an objective, and then until the end of the phase, that enemy unit is at -1 to wound your unit. So it doesn't have the caveat that you normally get with it requiring the enemy to be higher strength. Instead, it is that you are near an objective. And on your relatively flimsy toughness 3 models, this is an absolute lifesaver. It's going to make it so that bolters will be wounding on 4s rather than 3s, lasguns will be wounding on 5s, even those high rate of fire mid-strength weapons like assault cannons that usually wound on 2s into Aeldari will now be wounding on 3s. So it does go a long way to helping you keep an objective that you've got a unit on. Now you won't be invincible, of course, you are still essentially toughness 3 1 wound bodies with decent saves, but it is going to make it much trickier for your opponent to just get rid of a unit of yours on an objective with some light extra anti-infantry shooting from things like intercessors that normally you could fire into Aeldari and quite reliably at least kill a few off. Now that is going to be much less effective as a tactic. The Blades of Asuryan is another strat. This one is for your Dire Avengers or your Guardians. It simply gives your ranged weapons the pistol rule in your shooting phase. So if you are locked up in combat or you just want to kill an enemy unit as much as possible before the fight phase hits in case they've got some scary weapons in their squad, this will let you shoot into them and potentially wipe a unit or at least thin them down a little before you go into the combat phase. And with a unit of, say, Dire Avengers, they can potentially put in quite a bit of work thanks to their catapult. Picking off around 2 Marines from a unit with just 5 Dire Avengers can potentially, in some situations, mean 8 less chainsword attacks into your guys to deal with. So it is very well worth it. I think it's a great offensive strat to get some more damage into the enemy, but also it can be really good defensively too, to just limit the amount of melee that's going to be coming back into your squishier models. Next up we have Vol's Vengeance. This is also one command point. This one is put on a Warwalker unit, and you use it after a Dire Avenger or a Guardian unit has been destroyed in the enemy shooting or in the fight phase, and the Warwalker gets to shoot at that enemy unit that destroyed your unit. So it's essentially just a bit of revenge shooting, which is never a bad thing. If you've been in a combat and they've managed to kill a unit on an objective, kill one of your units on an objective, so they are now claiming it, but you managed to kill a few so there's only 1 or 2 models left, this could be a really good strat to then shoot them off it to deny your opponent some secondary points maybe, or just some objective points in their following turn. So it does have some really good potential from the objective play, not just in terms of the damage output. And whilst I don't think it's going to be one you're using every single turn, you can also really nicely kind of leverage it. If you've got a small unit or you've got a couple of models left in a squad, you can just charge them into the vehicle and hope that they kill it. You know, charge them in something like a Dreadnought or any other vehicle. If you've got some Warwalkers nearby with 2 Bright Lances, charge your unit of 1 or 2 models left into that, hope they die, and then you can activate your Warwalkers and get some Bright Lance shots out of sequence into that enemy vehicle. So it's a really nice way to potentially get some extra damage by sacrificing 1 or 2 kind of lesser models that you may have just hanging around. And then finally we have Cost of Victory. This is a buffed little uppy downy style strat. At the end of the enemy fight phase, you can pick a Guardian unit from your army that isn't in engagement range of an enemy unit, and it goes into Strategic Reserve, ready to jump back onto the board in your next turn. So it's really good, really standard. We've seen it many times before. Being able to get a unit jumping up from somewhere and then coming back somewhere else on the board to get better positioning for some shooting or objectives or whatever it may be is really good. But the addition here is that your returned unit, every destroyed model in that unit comes back. So if your 10-man unit of Guardians was down to 1 or 2 models, well, you just got 8 or 9 Guardians back for them. For 1 command point, that's really good. Just having uppy downy tricks for a command point is really good from sort of a gameplay perspective in terms of objectives and scoring. Getting 3 models back on top of that is just fantastic. And yes, they're only Guardian units, they're not going to do much, but that can still have a really big impact on later stages of the game and it really can help your units survive that much longer, because if they're down to a couple of models and you think they're going to be shot off the board next turn and you're going to need them later, for one command point you can essentially get that whole squad back. So it's a really good defensive, offensive, mobility, just everything strat. It is such a good one, and I think if you've got some Guardian units that you want to get around the board to score secondaries and just be a nuisance all game long, this is going to be a strat that you use quite a lot in your games. So all in all, I think this is actually a fairly good detachment. You may not think it's going to be super exciting because it's Guardian focused, but there are a lot of good stratagems here. The enhancements are okay. There's nothing super stand out, I don't think, but there are some fairly good ones. The detachment rule is very strong, especially if you lean in to your Guardians and support weapons and War Walkers. And the units that you'll be taking anyway are all okay. Like Guardians are nothing super exciting, but they're relatively cheap. Dire Avengers are very good. Your support weapons have got some great firepower to help you take down tanks, especially with the D cannon. And then War Walkers, as I said, are very good. They can have a great range of weapons, whether you want them to be anti-infantry, anti-tank, or anti-elite. They bring some really good rules. When they hit things, they get the rest of your army improved AP, so you can make your AP of even your Guardian's catapults -2, which is fantastic. So they are just a very strong force multiplier, and everything that you will want to take to get the benefit of the detachment rule works very well together and with the stratagems to make them a lot scarier than you may initially think just by looking at a big load of Guardians and War Walkers. So I actually really like this detachment. I do think it is rather good. I don't know if it's one of the better ones for the Aeldari, but it definitely has a lot more teeth than you will initially think, and that can lure your opponent into a sense of false security before you unleash an actually scary amount of firepower into them. But as always, I'd love to know what you think of the Guardian Battlehost. Have you played it? How has it performed for you so far? And how do you think it stacks up against the other detachments? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.